because I found it to be the easiest, but we're not actually live on YouTube. It's just, it's a private link.
Okay.
So nobody can see us. I haven't put out the link anywhere, but it makes it so easy that once we're live, that I can just go in and download the MP3 and then I have the video version for people. It's quite cool. So,
excellent.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's get started. David Carpenter, it's been forever, my friend. It's so good to see you and to get Shifting Our Schools back going. We've got out, what now? I think we've released 2 or 3 episodes of the new show. What are you thinking so far?
I'm really enjoying them, and I think it was wonderful to hear your first one. Now that we're in the 30s, sharing your background, because it gives a lot of understanding, I think, to the listeners about what led you into education. And you were connecting to your wife and what she was sharing, but also showing that grit, that determination, being a farm boy and a varsity sports player. I was just going, yep, I can understand how Jeff had that just drive to pursue all these different areas of helping people with teaching and learning. So I thought that was really good. And I enjoyed the show from Asia where they were talking about how to set up a one-to-one program, but we're just given the big points. Doing one-to-one, you could talk for hours and hours and hours. Right. But they hit the big ideas, and I thought that was very helpful. So a great start.
Oh, good. Well, thank you. I recorded that show that was just kind of my history as a kind of the bridge the gap, like what happened in 2009. How did you and I were trucking there every other week, and then I moved to Bangkok, and you moved back to the States, and time zones and life just kind of got in the way. But what's crazy is I've gone back and listened to, I think, at least half of the original 30 episodes. And I'm not sure much of the conversation has changed. And if you want to hear my complete story, no, that's episode 31. You can go back. It's an hour and a half. And I just sat down with a cup of coffee and talked. So you don't have to listen to the whole thing, but if you want to, it's there for you. But it's just what I love about this format. There's really no time constraints. It never gets old. But the conversations we were having back then are a lot of the similar conversations I think we're still having today. And we might have, the technology has changed. There were no such things as Chromebooks. I mean, in 2009, the iPhone had just come out. I mean, you think that we haven't ran a podcast since the iPhone came out. I mean, just, that's just crazy to think about. So, but let's start with you. You're back in Virginia. You've been back now for how long?
We've been here for 8 years. Our last stop was Morocco. We thought that was where we were going to spend a good part of our career, because for all of the folks out there in the international world, the opportunity to maybe end up in a place like Morocco with the wonderful weather, the culture. Rabat is the one most people are aiming for, and they just didn't have any openings. So we ended up at another one, a nice school, but it just wasn't the right fit for our children. And they were kind of getting to that point. They had that itch. They said, what's it like to be an American kid? One of them, Sam was born in Riyadh, connecting to your days in Saudi, and Max was born in Panama. And so they said, let's go back. And so we came back, and it's been a very positive, great experience. And from that time in Morocco, they learned a lot. Their grit meter really went high, because there were some things they had to deal with in school and outside of school, having come from Hong Kong and Taipei, where everything just ran so smoothly.
Right.
So that was a big deal. So it's been a good experience family-wise, but it's not been easy to come back and work in schools here. To go from Hong Kong International School to Senshu International School to previously Walworth Barber American International School, these cutting edge schools, and to come back and really step back in time in a lot of ways has not been easy as an instructional technologist. So I've been adapting, and a year ago, I'll tell a quick story. I was working in a big public school district at an elementary school, and we were doing our end of the year testing. And so the prep for that had been going on for 6 weeks. So my lab, where I taught all the kids, the role of being a partner in the curriculum lessons just wasn't happening. Myself and the art teacher were the two people that really covered the teachers so they could have their curriculum meetings. So
Right.
went everything against all the structure that you and I try to help schools do, to have that instructional technologies, that librarian, those learning specialists, that collaborative cohort developing what the lessons and the curriculums. That just wouldn't happen. But I was in the parking lot because I was out in a trailer, and I looked up, and 33 wonderful, beautiful kindergartners were walking in the rain out to me for class. I had 5 laptops, and I was running them in because testing was taking place, and 5 had gone bad.
Oh, geez.
And I stopped and I said, David, this isn't what you signed up for.
Yeah.
So that's when I kind of called a halt to it. And you're using the term pivot, and I think that's a wonderful term. In life, we hit different times to pivot. And so I pivoted after that, and I'll tell you about that in just a second. But so overall, it's been a wonderful experience, and I've been learning, but nothing like the degree I was learning overseas. Just the nature of people, as I always say, willing to go to a recruitment fair or get on Skype and talk to someone, and a few days later be signed up to get on a plane 6 months later. It's just a different mindset, and I really miss it. And so the great news is I'm going back. So
yeah. How about where are your kids at now?
Both are in college. Sam is a senior. He's about to head out into the work world. He's always had a job on the side, so he'll be ready. And our younger son is a physics and it looks like a math major at Virginia Tech.
Oh, wow.
And having just a wonderful learning journey there, because he really gets physics and he really gets math to a pretty high degree. So he's being pushed, but he's also an artist. And he's trying to balance those two worlds. So we couldn't be happy. We've been very fortunate.
Very cool. Very nice. So that's so good to hear.
Yeah.
I can't believe it's been 8 years already. It's amazing how time flies, huh?
It is. And I've followed what you all have been doing, you and Kim and the whole team. I know you've had different people coming and going with the Aduro process and the Kotels. And I'm such a instructional geek. I would go into some of your Kotel blogs and read from your students, just the discoveries that they were coming to. Because I remember you all went to Taipei after you and Kim went in right after we left.
Yeah, I think we did a cohort in Taipei right after you guys left there. Yeah. Yeah.
So that was really exciting for me to hear that you all were coming in, because they'd purchased all the technology, but they hadn't done the groundwork on changing instruction and assessment styles and developing a more inquiry approach that I'm sure you and Kim helped them with.
Yeah. That Kotel, I tell you, I don't know how Kim and I, started that in 2009. That was right about the time we finished, or we stopped doing the podcast. We had launched the Kotel program. Mm-hmm. And you're right. Like, those blog posts are incredible. It's just incredible thinking by educators. And I love watching people go on that journey. Mm-hmm. It is intense. It's long. It's, an 18-month program. We don't usually hold classes in the summer. This last year, we finally ran our first summer cohort. And because people said, I want to be able to finish it in a year. And we were like, well, we can try, but you have to understand, like, it's full on. And so we started a cohort last June, and they're going to, I think there's 12 people in that cohort, and, they're going to finish this May. And it's tough doing it in a year. I much rather like the 3 semester kind of thing we've got going on. So we're starting another cohort here, February 10th, I believe. Mm-hmm. Will be our 10th online cohort, which is just incredible for me. Plus all the ones that, we did at Taipei. We did some local cohorts at Taipei because the school brought us in, or Yokohama International School ran a couple local cohorts. New Delhi, American School New Delhi, running a couple local cohorts. South Saigon had one. It's just been an incredible program. I'm really trying to continue to grow it. And I think what makes it so powerful, like you said, are those blog posts, because people are reflecting on what they are learning and you reflect publicly, which allows everybody else to go in and be like, oh my gosh, if this kindergarten teacher can do this, then I can do this too. Or if this high school physics teacher can do this, I can do this too. And so just the idea of being public with your reflections, I think, is a big part of that learning curve.
Well, it's so practical. And that's always been a theme of the Shifting Our School podcast. And then with Mark, our EdTech co-op,
right,
taking that theory and figuring out ways to really make it work in the classroom, and having those teachers, as you're saying, provide their voice and their experience. And then, just as you're saying, that when others can see that, to go, okay, I'm ready to take some little steps.
Yeah.
And maybe I'm going to walk across the hall to Susan, who is a part of that cohort, and pick up some ideas from how. And then we get into the whole shifting process. All the different, if people go back and listen to some of the shows, as you're saying, it's such solid information. The ideas that come across through those shows are all about change management and bringing people together and finding ways to get early adopters moving forward, and getting your people more in the middle and your laggards to find ways that they can feel, you know what, I'm a good teacher. I've got great ways that I teach. But by having these conversations and reflecting upon the process, I'm seeing that potentially technology or inquiry or finding ways to connect my kids outside of the classroom, whether it be blended learning or the flat classroom project, whatever it might be. I think I can give that a go. So that's one of the great benefits of I think your courses, but the whole process of how we shift our schools. It's just, you come at it from so many different angles.
Yeah, the thing I love, I think, about the Kotel program is, the fifth course is where the participants have to make basically a 10-minute video talking about, implementing all of the theory and all of the ideas throughout the entire program. What I love is we've been able to take that list, and I'll make sure it makes it into the show notes, but we have taken they're all amazing, but we've taken the best of the best and we've put them on a Google Doc. And when we go into schools and we start talking about the SAMR model or the TPAC model, or, what does deep technology integration look like? We, at some point, will say, here is a list from kindergarten to high school, from AP to IB to a resource, special ed teacher. And we have these 10-minute videos that are a look into the classroom. And the fascinating thing that I'm finding is teachers a lot of times will say to us, I just need to see what this looks like in a 7th grade math classroom. So then we show them one of these videos that is a 7th grade math classroom. And then it's well, I can't do that because I don't have Macs like they do. Or I can't do that because they had, 21 kids in their class and I have 27 kids in my class. And that's the part to me where, how do we continue to stay, it's not about having the Mac. It's not about having 5 or 6 extra kids. That is more work. I'm not saying I had classrooms of 34 kids. I totally get it. Yes. But the idea there is it's the switch in the way teaching and learning happens, and isn't confined to a Mac, an iPad, a Chromebook, or whatever happens to be. And trying to get teachers to go there and to see that. The other thing is to see this is the end of 18 months of learning. I don't expect you to be here on day 1 of a training, but they've been pretty powerful that way of being able to show schools and teachers just, what is possible when you actually, spend some time in going deep and understanding the pedagogical foundations that need to change if you're truly going to implement this stuff correctly.
You just nailed it. If you're using TPAC, it does come down to the pedagogy. And that's why I'm almost thinking, listening back to the podcast about the one-to-one program, when the state of Maine so many years ago did their one-to-one program, at least in my reading, and the whole year before, they handed out the device to the students. The teachers got the devices. But my understanding was they were talking pedagogy, and they were talking about what is learning and how do we get students to deeper understanding. We use the term deeper learning now, but building that learning community and helping teachers, as you're saying, reflect, and helping them take those steps where hopefully you have the coaches. I don't think they used that term back then, but we use that term now. Help them see how when you're bringing in the technology and you're bringing different assessment techniques, you're bringing in that content knowledge that you have, that it all can come together to really get us where we want to go. So that's pretty powerful. Well, on that note, kind of shifting gears from Kotel to, let's say, your work in the district that you've been working with in Washington. What were some techniques that you were using there to shift? So it was a whole district, so it was multiple schools, or?
Yeah, so we have the two big contracts we have are schools. So one's a school district of 10,000 students. We're taking about 450 teachers through the training. And that school district has decided that all teachers 3rd through 12th grade go through the trainings, because that's really where they've done the one-to-one as part of their one-to-one initiative. And then the other school district is about 22,000 kids and about 1,100 teachers. And they are going through the training as well. And I think for both those districts, they both passed levies to go one-to-one, and they knew at a very, from the board and the superintendent level, that there needed to be some professional development around it. What we came in and said, and one of the things we're really, starting to, I guess, drive home, is that tool-based trainings will only get you so far. And by so far, I mean very minimal into what the tool can actually do. That what it really is understanding the pedagogical shifts that need to happen. In the one school district that we were working with, they had not updated their technology for 12 years. And so these teachers were going from, if they had a computer that worked, it was running Windows XP, going to, they passed the levy, and then within a couple months, they all had brand new MacBook Airs. And so just the leap in technology from 12-year-old technology in the classroom, that by itself was a massive hurdle. So there had to be some just, some technical stuff around that. And then with the contracts, and what we do with school districts is we've actually turned down school districts who don't want the long-term. Is we know through all the research that has come out, one-off PD days doesn't change culture. Sending teachers away to a 3-day conference doesn't change culture of a school district. It is a long-term process that you have to be committed to. So we partner with school districts who I have had the opportunity, or somebody in our company has had the opportunity, to sit down with the school board, make sure that the school board understands what this is going to mean for you. Sitting down with the leadership team and making sure you understand what this is going to mean to you, and then signing on for a minimum is 3-year process. And depending how big the school district is, it takes us that long to get through. So the one school district is going to be about 7 years, just because of how they're rolling out devices. I mean, 22,000 kids is just, if you had the money to roll out 22,000 laptops, I don't even know if you wanted to do it. But the way levy funds come in here in the States, you only get so much money every 6 months. And so, it's very much a rollout process. And so just helping them, even through much like you, David, we've all, especially internationally, have been rolling out one-to-one programs since 2002, 2003.
Right.
And you talk about, when you came back to the States, it felt like you were going backwards a bit. And the way that I've sold that to school districts is like, we've been to the future, we know what it looks like, and we've come back to take you there.
Nice.
And so, that's been kind of that's kind of been the go-to line of, we've been in one-to-one since 2002, 2003. And we've taken school districts through this. We know what this looks like. And we can help you through this as well. So,
and I think it's important to say, and for the two of us, it isn't like we're being condescending towards American public schools. They have so much more to do, many more needs, so many more constraints and things that they just have to cover than these really pretty nice individual international schools.
Right.
And one of the big ones, and it's just an old song we sing, is the testing.
And the testing is huge. Just funds are different. We're reliant, for better or for worse, here in the state of Washington anyways, we're relying on your community passing levies.
Mhm.
or passing some way to get you those funds to roll it out. And so, one of the things I think that we bring to a district that has seemed to go really well is we don't only just do the professional development for the teachers. So like in the one school district, the teachers have 12 days of training over 3 years. So we get 4 times a year that we get to pull them out of the classroom, a full day, they get a sub, and we are taking them through these trainings. We're just getting ready to finish our first cohort, or we just finished our first cohort in the first district. But besides that, we also then, meet with the entire administrative team twice a year to talk about, okay, what are you looking for when you go into a tech-rich classroom? What do you need to be considering at the school level of the change management? What does this look like? When you're running staff meetings, how are you going to change the way you run staff meetings? Because now you are now in a one-to-one school with every teacher bringing a laptop, and helping to just, play on those. And then the big one that we've been focused on the last year or two, is also bringing in the parent community.
Yes.
And so whenever we sign contracts with school districts, that always includes at least 1, if not 2 parent nights a year. And actually I'll put a link to one of the school districts actually brought a film crew in and did a cool little video from the last parent night I did. And then broke it down into kind of what were the big points. To me, that's what I love about having a long-term commitment with the school district is we get to move all stakeholders. We meet with the school board and talk to them what this is going to mean for them. And then we're talking to parents on the ground on how do we support kids in learning in a digital age? And what does that mean for you as a parent? So, and I know you're involved in that a lot too with your wife, both of our wives being counselors are totally into that.
And that's really where I'm kind of pivoting, returning to counseling, because I think more than ever, our jobs have always been to developmentally support our kids to help them grow and learn. But when you're putting them into this information-rich world and putting devices into their hands, how to guide them to, I really, because I'm just formulating my belief system on this, but helping them develop their value system and their beliefs developmentally appropriately, of course, but to help them make decisions around how they use technology in school, outside of school. So that's one of the exciting things about going to Saigon South. They just have some very forward-looking, thinking leaders who are putting together, they have guidance programs, but want to go further with it. And we use that term, like your wife, I'm sure, says all the time, the whole child. But now more than ever, how are we helping children be ready to use the technology effectively? And as we read constantly in the news now, it's being seen in many ways as a negative when we get to that term of addiction and things like that once we get into the middle school and high school. So it's a societal discussion too. And with that new iGen book that came out this past year, talking about just how really around mobile devices, phones, how that's affecting teenagers and such.
Yeah.
There's a lot there that we need to discuss. So I'm very excited about jumping back into counseling, but also wearing my instructional technology cap as a designer, helping with that curriculum development process. Now, I've made a note here because I do want to come back to the parent thing, because you all have a parent course. And I wanted to learn more about that, because I so think it's wonderful to have the parent nights, and then maybe you're working with your administrators who then do their normal parent coffees, and they are feeling hopefully more knowledgeable and they can support parents. But I really love what you all have done in putting these modules up online for parents to asynchronously develop their understanding on how they can work with their children in using technology. But before we do that, maybe if we could drill down on back to pedagogy, what would be a couple of your class sessions? What would they look like in helping teachers think about how they teach? Not so much talking about the technology yet, but just saying, really, what am I aiming for? How am I getting there currently? Back to your reflection point, what might that look like?
Yeah, I think, it looks different. And one of the things we do is we work with school districts to figure out exactly where they are. And then we customize, kind of our trainings, exactly what that district or those teachers need. But one of the things that we've really been focusing on is how do we get away from, once every kid has a device in their hands, how do we get away from a summative assessment always having to be a test?
Right.
So one of the things we've really focused in on, and just the one school district we're working with, in the 3 years we're with them, at least 4 times we take them through the design cycle.
Mm-hmm.
And how do we do, and the design cycle, project-based learning, challenge-based learning, problem-based, you call it whatever you want. There is a cycle that we all go through when we want to solve a problem. And so what we have done is we will teach a different technology, but we will do it through the same cycle that you can use in the classroom.
Mm-hmm.
So in one example, we had teachers make a YouTube mashup video when YouTube Editor was still out. We're now using Adobe Spark, but when YouTube Editor was still there, we took them through the design process of like, first you need to know what the tool does. You need to have an idea. Then you need to develop a plan. Then you need to create your thing. And then we evaluate it. And there is a formative assessment process through that entire thing. And you have a summative product at the end that is not a sit down and take a test product. And if anything, to me, that is what technology allows. It allows us to do things differently. And so we, throughout our trainings, will continue to look at those types of pieces. Another thing we've been focusing really hard on is the idea of visual literacy. That for the first time, this generation is growing up media first, but our schools are still very much a text-based world. Mm-hmm. And so what we're seeing is, in all the data that's coming out specifically here in the US around the longer kids are in school, the more disengaged they get with schooling. And what we also know is the farther you go into your schooling, the more text heavy it gets and the less visual learning becomes. So we're really focusing in on that visual literacy piece. When you are, we know so much more about how the brain works, and the brain works. We are all visual learners first, based on brain research. And this generation growing up in media, the amount of TV that they are watching is triple that our generation watched. They've got devices in front of them all the time, whether it's Snapchat or Instagram or whatever social network that they are using. All of them are media first apps as far as pictures or video. So we have this brain in our schools that is very much drawn and engaged by media. And yet most teachers were raised and teach in a schooling system that was, we all read the book. And then if we were a really good class, we maybe got to watch the video.
Right.
And all of a sudden you're teaching a generation who's being raised that the Star Wars trailer is out 8 months before the video. Mm-hmm. Right. And so those kids are engaging with video and images different. And how do we use that? How do we engage? Our big essential question is, how do we engage a media first brain in a text-based school? And I think there's a way to do that. I still want kids to read text. I still think reading is a really important skill. But I think we have to think hard as educators around this idea that, I might need to show a book trailer. I might need to have kids deeply look at an image and not just ask kids, oh, here's an image, what do you see? But I mean, really dissect an image on what is being thrown at you. And then take that knowledge and now let's go into a text-based world and bring those two together. So I think those two, the idea of, how do we assess differently when every kid has a creation device in front of them? And then the idea of this media first generation and engaging them in a new media first learning world, I think are probably two of the big things that we really have been focusing on in most of our trainings.
And one of the things, and talking about going back in time, we did a show on, I forgot the term. It was Mark and I were interviewing, this is on the EdTech Co-op podcast, we're interviewing one of his PhD candidates, and she had come up with the term, it was like a media journey assessment where the kids would produce this media product. Yeah. And I always use the term underneath the hood, though, was a lot of writing, a lot of planning, a lot of design work.
Absolutely.
And the term we used to use, authenticity in the product, because they're producing something for a audience. But the idea that students, if they're going to produce that media, they're going to have to use text to write out those storyboards, to if there's going to be dialogue, if there's going to be speech bubbles, whatever it is. And it's a way to, we say, kind of trick the kids who say, well, I'm not much of a writer, but they end up doing a lot of writing. So that's one of the, coming back to teachers saying, what you're doing great things in helping your kids as writers, but as you're pointing out, let's bring it into their world, this media world. They're still going to write, but they might even write more. But in the end, you're going to get so much more enthusiasm when they create this product because it's theirs, right?
Yeah. And we know from brain research, you remember and retain more if you are engaged in the learning process.
Yes.
Right. So to your point, like if it's something that I'm excited about and I get to create a video or a podcast or whatever it happens to be, a piece of art, and I'm engaged in that process, but it happens to be about World War II, I'm going to learn more and retain more about World War II because my brain is truly engaged in the process.
Mm-hmm.
That's why we, the reason why they redid Bloom's taxonomy is we know more about the brain, that creating stuff is where stuff is truly embedded into the brain. How do we take kids through a creation process?
Exactly.
And to your point, like the learning happens in the process, not the product.
Yes.
And how do we continually assess the process, knowing that the product is going to be there when we get done? I had a great story. One of the things we were talking about in a training with some social studies teachers was using Google My Maps. So, there's Google Maps and there's Google My Maps where kids actually get to create the maps. And it was a social studies teacher who was looking at, I don't remember what war it was. It might've been World War II, World War I, but they were looking at the different battlefields and he had split the kids up. And of course the map was shared with everybody in the class, but this group had to do those 5 battlefields. And so they actually had to put the place markers on the map. They actually had to embed video. And when he started, he's like, I came to the training and I thought about it and I thought, well, I'll give it a work. He really didn't think it was going to work. He, at the end of it, had the best test scores he's had in 6 years because he had kids creating this map of where all the war sites were and not just writing them down, taking notes. They actually created the map together. And then they each had to explain how I don't remember, they weren't all just battlefields, but they were like, monuments and things that had happened during the war. But just his, like, from one training to the next, he came back. He's like, you're not going to believe this. They just blew the test out of the water. And I was like, why'd you still give him a test? But beside the point, right? But just, there is power here when we engage this media first brain. And if nothing else, like, it's so easy, right? The YouTube videos and the way you can make videos and edit videos and bring stuff together to tell stories differently in a very visual, compelling way that is based in brain research, I think it's another reason why I want every kid to have a device.
Yes. And one of the things with you were just hitting on the learning process. One of the things I think is happening with out of Harvard and Project Zero, they've been ahead of the curve for so many years, but with making thinking visible, the visible thinking movement is, I've noticed with Jim Rees, who's been very involved in that program for so many years, working with how do we document learning, and you just nailed it. It isn't the finished product. We do want that, and we do want to have rubrics, and we want kids to really be able to reflect, and hopefully, back to Bloom's, that they are showing a lot of critical thinking, and hopefully, I'm a history teacher, they're making connections that I had, if it was me, and we were dealing with World War or something, I would try to make them have connections to what's happening to other time periods and things like that.
Absolutely.
But one of the big things that Jim, and this comes back to Mark Hofer too, is documenting that whole process. And then we get to portfolios and things like that, and away from tests, but having kids with portfolios that have really carefully developed questions that push the kids to really think and move beyond knowledge level. That we want to ask kids questions that are going to say, well, what led you to this? How did this happen? Open-ended questions that aren't, you can't Google it. One, it's about you.
That's right.
Two, it's about your understanding, which we always talk about goes way beyond just knowledge level. learning.
Absolutely.
Well, let me ask you, because I didn't want to lose this one, and hopefully with your parent course, because one of the things is I'd want to figure out a way to get that course, those series of classes out to as many school districts as possible, right? You're putting on your business cap. I know you're thinking about that and you're working on it. That's one. Now, did Kim or Chrissy, who developed that? Who developed those courses?
So the courses were really developed by Kim and Chrissy. They have spent so much time on those. They are so good. Every course is interviewing parents, and we have parents of kindergartners to parents of high school kids, which is always fun to see a high school kid sitting down next to their parent, having these conversations about how much time do you actually play video games. Mm-hmm. The readings that are in there, the conversations in the forums, it is such, I think, a really rich resource for parents, no matter where you are. And one of the nice things is we give the courses away to any district that we sign a contract with. So, these two school districts, one of 10,000, one of 22,000, every parent, if they want, gets access to that. Now, trying to get that word out is really, really difficult. But we're seeing some uptake within those. And then, like you said, we're just trying to figure out how do we partner with school districts, or what we're starting to think about is what does a partnership look like with PTA organizations? And can we come in, and we're trying to figure out, there's a couple things I think that are holding us up, and I'd love to pick your brain on this too, is like parents, every parent already thinks they're doing a pretty good job. So no parent really wants, and I don't mean this bad, but no parent wants to be able to say like, well, I need to go take a course on being a parent. Mm-hmm. Right. And so I think we're struggling with calling them a course or calling it a parenting certificate. So I think there's some wording that we need to work with there, and I'm not sure what it is.
Yeah, your hook. You need a strong hook, right?
Yeah, something that isn't like you're going to go take a course to become a better parent. And no parent wants to do that. Anyway, so we're still kind of working with that. And then also, what are some different systems we can set up with some PTA organizations? That's right. whether it is a PTA organization wants to, purchase the courses and run their PTA through it. And we could do either Google Hangouts like this, where we would be able to come into a PTA meeting, or even to some kind of thing like we did with Kotel, where, we fly in, we do a face-to-face with the parent community. Mm-hmm. Then the parent community goes and takes one or two of the courses online. And then we come back in again, we debrief those two courses, that there could be a mix of this idea of face-to-face with online learning. But I think it's still relatively new. I think, as far as I know, we're one of the only organizations that really has tailored this parenting in a digital age kind of certificate. There's 6 courses. They all focus on something a little bit different, whether it be social media or one's called Technology Never Sleeps. There's a podcast coming out, I don't know if it's this week's podcast or next week's podcast, but where we interviewed a 5th grader and she makes us play with Musical.ly. And to listen to a 5th grader talk about her social network and the way she uses it with her friends is like, A, awe-inspiring, B, mind-blowing, yes. Right? Like, it's just this incredible. And so trying to help parents understand that it's not all bad. Your kid, they're doing some real amazing things in these places. And yes, we do need to keep them safe. And also understanding that they're just growing up differently than we did. And it's really, really difficult. I think the best story I have that I love to share with parents is, when we graduated from high school, anything that happened to us in high school kind of left. We all went off to university, and you stayed in touch with the 3 or 4, great friends that you wanted to stay in touch with, or, the couple people that maybe went to the same university as you did. But you really got to start over fresh and leave all that high school quote unquote drama behind. And I have a friend who just her daughter 2 years ago graduated from an international school, and went to university and struggled her entire freshman year with all of the high school drama following her into university, because there is no disconnect now. They're still all friends on Facebook. They're still all friends on Instagram. And those same rules even as a freshman, she was dealing with, well, I don't like that kid, but he's friends with her and she's my friend. So if I unfriend him, she's going to be upset. And I'm sitting here going like, you're 19 years old. You're still playing these, I mean, the adult brain in me can't, but she was really, really struggling with this idea of friendships. And it's really made me think of like, wow, we had that break because, we had reunions 10 years later in your 20-year reunion. These generations, it'll be interesting to see what a reunion looks like.
Right. Right.
They know everybody's lives and they're same, they all have the class of 2018 Facebook group, and you get to keep up on everybody's life. If you want to, you can be there forever, So even just something like that, I think really shows how different their lives were to ours just because of the connections they have. And it's just, it's that kind of stuff that I really am very passionate about, helping parents understand kids and helping kids understand parents.
Yes. And keeping, as you're saying, keeping your fingers on the pulse, because it's just changing so quickly and it's just happening. It's just exploding around us of new ways to approach relationships and how to kind of make that life change from, as you're saying, high school to college. And what happens after college? We don't know, because it's going to be different for this generation and such. A couple of things that come to mind. One, I would definitely say with the PTA, that's something I'd already been thinking about, because that is the doorway into schools and into the parent base there. And the counselors, connecting with them. And what also comes to mind is it would take a while, but for you all to develop like an ambassador program of potentially, your first using design cycle, you prototype it with your Kotel people as they go all over the world. Right. And then they become an ambassador, starting just with this parenting course, but it could become other things, that they're your eyes on the ground and your conduit to share information, to get people interested. And then potentially people start taking the course, and like you're saying, offer it virtually, blended, have small groups for parents that want to learn that way. There's so many different directions, because we know there's so many directions, different ways that people learn. But back to where we started, and for me, where I'm headed, I think that's probably one of the biggest things that we as a society have to work on right now is, and it's not just skilling, because we talk about digital citizenship, and you and I always just say citizenship, but it's so far beyond citizenship, right? Right. It's helping kids develop the character traits, the attitudes, the dispositions that, one, they control the technology. The technology doesn't control them. Right. That, like you were saying with that fifth grader, that you can put forth scenarios in front of parents that show them the constructive nature of what the connectivity does, what the information access does, and then hugely what the creativity can do, right? So if they can see these scenarios and they go, I didn't even know that, then we know, okay, we've got a little hook there. Right. And we say, how are we going to help you move your son or daughter so that they, and I use this term, develop their personal learning system, where they're using this array of tools for communication, for curating of information, for having their go-to sites for tutorials, that they build out this kind of toolkit around their belt almost. We've used that term. I think people use the backpack, the digital backpack, but that's still just a part of it. Right. That's coming along, that the counselors, the teachers, the instructional technologists, administrators, we're all helping these children work off of what they and their families believe is important. Yeah. And if in life that hasn't gone away, that if you can base your decision on your values and what your family believes in, what your community believes in, then you're going to be in a much better position to make decisions regarding how you use technology, and how when you're with people, are you really with people? Are you present, for example, right? That's right. Yeah. So I'm looking forward to following what you all do with that. And I want to go, we've got some big districts around here. I want to go meet with people there on your behalf and
Well,
share
thanks for
these
that.
ideas, because
Yeah.
I feel a lot of the parents, I'm speaking broadly here, do feel out of touch with what are their tools that they would use to parent their children in these situations. And what do we all do? We go back to how we were parented.
Yeah.
Just as you're pointing out, these situations are very, very different. You still have solid beliefs ways your parents taught you, but you've got to come up with new applications and new
Yeah.
strategies,
Yeah.
right?
And for better or for worse, these kids have real friendships in their devices. And it's really hard for us to understand that. We just didn't grow up in a time period where you were a friend because you got to go hang out at their house. And now kids don't go to each other's houses. Parents, for a variety of reasons, there are so many social pressures on parents today. There's so much pressure on kids today that kids don't physically go and hang out in places anymore. This last holiday season, I went to the mall. Not that I wanted to, but I went to the mall and it was packed with people. And I sat down on a bench in like the big mall here south of Seattle. And I counted how many groups and it was during break, how many groups of just kids walking around without parent supervision, just a group of teenagers hanging out at the mall, which for my generation is something we very much did.
Mm-hmm.
One group of about 5 boys in about a 45-minute time period. Everybody else was with their parents, everybody in devices.
Mm-hmm.
Those friendships, for better or for worse, are not happening in the same places they were when we were kids. And it was one of those moments where I was like, I talk about this all the time, but I want to actually see it. And one group, great looking guys, like, probably I'm going to guess like 8th graders, 9th graders, I saw them twice walk in the circle of the mall like I used to do. But they were it. They were the only group I saw that didn't have parent supervision of all age groups at the mall, and to me, that was just one of those things like, kids just aren't quote unquote hanging out in places anymore. And maybe the mall isn't a place you hang out anymore. I don't know. Everybody shops online at Amazon. I don't know. But I just like, to me, that was one of those things where, parents are constantly saying like, well, I just want my kid to go out and play. Well, that's fine, but nobody else's kids are going out and playing. So there's nobody for your kid to go out and play with, So anyways, it's a different time period and just trying to help everybody with that.
Well, on that note, I was listening to one of the NPR shows in the afternoon, and they had a woman from Texas, and she she didn't plan to start it, but it's a movement now called Nat Until 8th. And in her community, back to your point of maybe a family feels isolated, they want to send Susie outside to play, but there's no one out there. She made the decision that she was not going to have her child have a phone until 8th grade. And she started talking with other people, and they started talking to other people. And so they formed a community around that. And I need to go to the website and follow up on it. But that's where a community came together and back to the values point and said, this is something we believe in. Not saying whether it's right or wrong, but that's what they believed in.
Right.
And from that, they turned the tide on expectations on so many families that do feel the pressure when Ahmed comes home and says, when do I get my phone? Because I see my buddies with their phones.
Exactly.
So as we talked so much about in the previous shows so many years ago, you come at these things in so many different ways. It's just little prototypes, and you see what works and what doesn't work. And back to your point of the work that you all do to individualize for different districts, it's not going to be the same for every family or any group. But you find that kind of formula that works for you, and then you just keep an eye on it. And you sharpen the saw and be ready to adapt, right? Because you just brought so many good points just about how our world, what we're talking about right now about kids going to college, what will it be like in 2 years?
Yeah.
What will be different?
And when we do our parent workshops and even in our online courses, I mean, the theme that constantly comes back to is it's having open and honest conversations with your kids. If it's all about having the conversations, when I meet parents and they're like, well, they're always on their phone, and I'll ask them like, well, what are they doing? Well, I don't know.
Mm.
Well, that's a problem. They're going to be on their phones because that's where their friendships are. But it's okay for you to sit down with your child and say, hey, what's going on in Instagram, or show me some photos. Who's this in this photo? And oh, isn't that a funny one? And, you're not prying, but you just want to know. My mom and dad used to know who my friends were because they came over to the house, or I went over to their parents' house. And without that, their friendships are still there. And it's about having starting as soon as you give the child a device, having those conversations of, well, what do you see? How does this make you feel? Do you know that's okay? Is that okay?
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that a good thing? Just keep me in the loop. You don't need to follow them. There's this privacy issue that we get into. Kids want to be private. They need to break away from their parents. We're really struggling with that as a society as well. But keep be able to have the conversation. And I think you'll find that throughout all of our parent stuff, that's what it's about. Because like you said, the value is different for every family, and
Yes.
that value is right for that family. But have conversations about, what do we value? How do we know this is right? How does that post or that link or that comment fit with the values of our family?
Mm-hmm.
And if you continue to have those conversations, I think we raise a great generation.
And that's just we were saying, that's nothing new. You go back to
Yeah.
Counseling 101.
Yeah.
It's to have open communication and maybe some structural things in the households to say. And I remember back to, I think you were in Shanghai, or maybe it was Bangkok, when you did the screen free, I can't remember the term.
Oh, yeah, screen free week.
Screen free week.
Yeah.
But and that was way ahead of its time. But it's back to the point that like today I was talking to my doctor, and she's got a 4-year-old, and she was saying that when her nephews and nieces come over, they park their phones at the door. They cannot come in because to the values of that family, they're there to be present,
right,
to do things. And that's what works to their family. And as a counselor working with families on having family meetings and coming up with your family mission statements, and then from that deriving your technology plan. What is your family technology plan? But that's nothing new to say. We're going to have structures that are going to support our having conversations, because as you and I are trying to help schools shift, you've got to have structures, you got to have systems to help the process move forward. Yeah.
And I think it's just helping parents understand, like, yes, there is a new device in your house, but that doesn't mean that the structures and ideas have to change.
Yes, that's a good
You don't need to know. You're not going to know how it all works. You don't need to know how Snapchat works. You just need to know that this is a place that kids go, and are our values still there, right? And have those conversations for kids to do the right thing.
Exactly. So, I know that you don't have but so much time. So one of the things I kind of wanted to move to, I've been going back in time again, putting my list together, sound like Santa Claus, of some wonderful guests we've had in the past and some new ones. And it will just be, as always, a logistical opportunity to connect to people all over the world, to have some conversations. So I'm just wondering, what are a couple themes that you and Kim and Chrissy maybe have talked about that you all want to try to cover?
That's a really good question. I think, our idea with this is like, we kind of see this, and I think we already have it in iTunes, is like the Eduro Learning Podcast Network, is we're kind of shifting our schools to figure out what are some themes that are emerging. And then how do we have podcasts that really stick to a theme? So this idea of parenting in a digital age is a theme that has come up now in probably 4 of our podcasts that have been recorded recently. And so, for us, that's a theme that's emerging, that, okay, do we want to then break off and have a podcast that is just dedicated to parenting in a digital age? One of the things we came up with, one of the things I love to do, is just have unscripted conversations. Yesterday I had a conversation with Will Richardson, who I've not touched base with 5 years. With Dean Shareski up in Canada, who I've not talked with. And they were just unscripted, like like this, like catching up, what's new to you, seeing what themes come out. And I love doing that. I love just talking to educators on what are they doing, where are their pressure points, what are some things they're dealing with or struggling with in their classrooms. And so we're just thinking that there might be a podcast that's just like teachers telling their stories.
Yes.
And so we're coming up with some names for that. I think for shifting our schools, I think we want to keep it focused on where it always has been, is like that organizational change, kind of like how, what schools are shifting. I'm trying to get Andy Torres, who was, very much involved in the early years.
Yeah.
I haven't had him on. So I'm trying to set up a date to get him. He's in Dubai now, and he's actually going back to open a new school back in China. And so excited to see where he's been. He was a elementary principal, I think, when we started shifting our schools, and then he's now the head of a school, and now he's going to open a new school, so he's really done some really cool stuff as well. And so I think, I don't know. I know that's a really good question. I think we're, it's the early days. We're just kind of figuring this out. Do we break off different podcasts that are focused on themes, or is it more of a general education shifting of culture, shifting of our school, shifting at a large? And are all of those little bits of the puzzle that it takes to shift? I don't know. It's a good question. And I think we're kind of playing with that. What are your thoughts? Like, what are you thinking?
You just hit on several that really hit home well for me. And to talk to Will and Dean, these thought leaders who have been leading us for so long, what are their ideas that are percolating about what do we need to be thinking about, and where do we need to be going? So often when we look forward, especially with technology, it's a cliche, but it's changing so fast that we almost need to jump over what we think is going to happen next in a lot of ways. Yeah. So you would talk to people like them that can almost see over what's going to happen there. And I guess with the Horizon Report and what they have, is Kim still involved with that?
I don't think she's done the Horizon Report in a couple of years.
So she's dropped off that. So things like that. So talking to those leaders and seeing what they have to say. But you really nailed the one that I hold close to my heart, which I think we've done a good job on, is having those conversations with teachers.
Yeah.
But just like you, I remember when we were the Ed Tech Co-op, and you were saying, Dave and Mark, there are these things called micro classes. And we were going, oh, what are those? And that was a long time ago.
It was a long time ago. And now we're trying to start these micro credentials, and
yes,
I don't know. It's a fun time to play. I get, it was good. I think talking with Will Richardson yesterday, and he was just like, are we seeing movement? Because we were both saying the same thing you and I said, the conversation really hasn't changed.
Yes.
People ask me quite often, they're like, well, what new material do you have? And I'm like, I don't have anything new. I'm still trying to get people to do the old material. It's not material. It's a way of thinking. And, are we seeing movement? I think we are. I hope we are. I think the price of devices has come down to, I think we're very, we said this on the podcast back in 2008, 2009 internationally, there was I think by 2009, I think I said in one of the podcasts, I went back and listened to it, was, there's going to be a line in the sand between those international schools that went one-to-one and those that didn't.
Yes.
And there was really a line that was drawn, and, and the schools started to really roll out one-to-one because that's where they were. And I think we're now seeing that in different parts of America. I mean, there are, there's Maine, who went one-to-one years ago now, and even places like Iowa, North Dakota, where at the state level, there's really a push to do this. Here in my state of Washington, I think the line is going to be drawn here in another 3-4 years, where you either went one-to-one before 2020, or you're now trying to play catch up. And it's going to be a struggle for those. When I'm a parent and I'm going to say, okay, am I buying a house in that school district or that school district, and which one is going to best prepare my child for the future? I think it could be, there's issues there for school districts if they don't understand what this is. So I don't know. I hope we're moving.
Well, it was, I remember when, I can't remember what the email was between you, Mark, and myself, when I was, maybe it was, I can't remember what it was. It was about a year ago. And I said, well, I think I'm falling behind in instructional technology because I used to be right at the tip of the sword and cutting edge. We ran a virtual school for elementary school, and we were doing daily news. This was 2002, and kids were doing TED Talks. We didn't know what they weren't. We didn't know what they were back then, but
that's right. TED Talks before they were TED Talks.
Right. With guys like Mike Lambert. And man, if Mike ever listens to this podcast, we are putting him on. There's a little history there. When we started the podcast, Mike was one of I said, Mike, you've got to join us, but I couldn't corral him. Talk about a creative man who, because he taught Sam, and I've emailed him like every 3 years to say, you helped develop in my son this incredible ability to be a critical thinker, to make connections, to pause and reflect, all these dispositions, because he was having kids just do research on, okay, you're interested in that, go over to the computers, do it, then put a presentation, and you're going to publicly speak. You're going to get, and we didn't call them TED Talks, and we videotaped some we didn't. But I thought I was behind, and then I emailed you all, and I think Mark said it's a recycling program. We're recycling. I thought that really nailed it. And then you were saying, I'm really not doing anything that new, because in a lot of ways, what we're saying, what we had are attitudes and their belief, as you're saying, beliefs, and the technology is going to keep changing. Right. But it's that mindset that we have to just keep pushing the kids to say, you're in charge of this, kiddos, not us. You can't be passive learners. I'm trying to go back. I'm thinking all the way back to that term of, and you were using it, getting schooled. Remember, I can't remember the blogger who was so good at that, called it, we need to unschool our schools. Yeah. But there's pushback with that, as we know, with kids, to say, and we talked about this on one of the shows, that we almost beat the curiosity, the desire to learn out of them by the time they're reaching middle school. And then a system that's measuring them on multiple choice answers, as opposed to show me what you know and you have control over how you show me.
Yeah. And I think now, with the research that's coming out again at the national level, and I'll make sure to put it in the show notes, but the idea that it was very fascinating, because, the research came out and showed that I think it's something like only 32% of high school kids say that they're engaged in the learning process, which means there's like 70% of kids that say that school doesn't engage them. I had a local school district here who took the exact same questions and gave it to their school district of about, they must be about 18,000, 20,000 kids. And they gave it to all their high school kids, and it almost lined up exactly with what the national average was. Like, they were right on average, where, by the seniors are like, no, I'm here because A, I have to be, right? It's law that I'm here. B, I'm freaking bored out of my mind. And they were looking at the same thing, like where do we, school kids into just, playing school and not thinking anymore, not being those critical thinkers, and how do we bring that back? And where, to me, that, and it's not a tech issue. Tech helps with that, but there's something in the system that we have to think about. What does that mean? And I think, it even hits home for me being here in Seattle now. And you've probably heard about just what's happening here in Seattle as a city with the growth of the tech industry here. I had two friends who were human resources at Amazon, and what it takes to get hired at Amazon, the degree is like, yeah, you have to know your stuff, but that's not why Amazon hires you. It's 2 days of interviewing, and you're interviewed by multiple different teams and multiple different people, because they want to know if you're a fit culturally. Mm-hmm. Can you think? Can you analyze? Can you apply? Can you get along with others? All those soft skills, that we talk about that are so important. That's what they're looking for. Sure, you're an engineer, you're a coder, you're a marketing person, you're a photographer to take pictures. Like, fine, you've got the skill set, but are you a fit in those other ways? And that's the part that that we've always said, that like pushing into this testing thing, we're losing that stuff.
Yes, very, very much.
Yeah. Anyway, well, my friend, it was great catching up with you. I'm so glad we're back doing this. It's so good to just sit and chat with you.
Me too.
I've taken some notes real quick here that I'll put into the show notes as well. But if you want to send me any links that you might have that you want to put into the show notes, the show will be going out sometime in the first part of February. So please send those my way. And always great. David Carpenter back on Shifting Our Schools. I love it. I love it.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to the journey that we're back together with a much larger group. Yeah. And I do want to share that my theme is going to be this. Well, you just hit on it right there. This preparation of helping students have the grit, the perseverance, the overcoming obstacles, the desire to be creative, to be in charge, to be their own learner. It just sounds like such basic stuff.
I love it.
But that's a big part of it. But I'm also, when I get to Saigon South, I'm really looking forward to, because it's a very shifted school, sitting down with teachers and, just as you were saying, having conversations about what teaching and learning looks like in their classrooms. So bringing those back to the Kotel, kind of those blogs where people were sharing of their learning, but to have these probably little short ones, not too long, but have that offering for people to connect to as well. So I'm excited about that. And one thing, Jeff, I was a pain in the rear always to say we need to have a tagline, and it can change. And when we were doing the EdTech Co-op, each show I would try to figure out what were we talking about and what could the tagline be.
Yeah,
because we often use it's not about technology, it's about teaching and learning, and that, as I emailed you a couple of years ago, I'm seeing that more and more.
Right,
people are realizing that, but that's something for folks to think about. But so maybe this show it's a journey, and you can step away from people you worked with in the past, but you can come back together and create and make great things happen.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. All right, my friend, I'm going to click stop on the recording here, and we'll see everybody next time on Shifting Our Schools.
Terrific.